Trotzdem bin ich stolz drauf, dass wir nicht bei diesem Frankfurter Medientellerrand stehen bleiben, sondern viel ins Ausland blicken, Themen anschauen, die nur eine Schnittstelle zu den Medien haben. Wir haben regelmäßig Auslandskorrespondenten zu Gast. Wir schauen an, was sich in der Welt tut, auch negative Entwicklungen. Und deswegen freue ich mich, dass wir auch heute Abend so einen internationalen Fokus haben. Ich persönlich habe eine sehr enge Beziehung, würde ich sagen, zum Vereinigten Königreich. Und ich erinnere mich sehr an die Berichterstattung rund um den Brexit, als die Schlagzeilen davon dominiert waren von Folgen. Ich finde, es ist sehr ruhig geworden, vielleicht ein bisschen zu ruhig, bis vor kurzer Zeit. Denn, seien wir mal ehrlich, so aktuell hätten wir das in der Planung ja gar nicht denken können, dass auf einmal wieder so viel UK in den Schlagzeilen ist. Gut, wir haben sehr viel Gesprächsstoff heute Abend. Nutzen Sie die Chance, stellen Sie Fragen. Ich freue mich sehr auf den Talk und übergebe das Wort. Vielen Dank, dass Sie da sind.
Vielen Dank, Frau Sauer. So, as Frau Sauer said, I will now switch into English, and John will also present or talk in English. Welcome also from my side. It's great that we've got a big group of people at this joint event of the Frankfurter PresseClub and the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft Rhein-Main e.V. I will not speak long either because John has got a lot of things to get through. He's going to give us a kind of state of the nation talk on Britain. It'll be a different state of the nation talk from the recent one by Donald Trump. I suspect there'll be fewer superlatives, and maybe there'll be less chest beating from John compared with Donald Trump. But anyway, there's lots and lots to talk about. And just by way of introduction of John, I think many of you probably know him already or were even at one of his previous lectures here. John is a distinguished journalist and political commentator and TV and radio pundit and author. I'll come back to the author bit in a minute, but he started his career, one of his earliest phases was as correspondent for the Daily Telegraph in East Berlin before the wall fell. So very exciting. And shortly thereafter, he was in Moscow when the USSR collapsed. So another very interesting time in his development. In the meantime, he's done a lot of things. He's worked with and for the BBC. He was an editor at New Statesman. He's worked with and for Financial Times. He's done an awful lot of things. In the meantime, he is the chair, he calls himself chair, of the Königswinter Conference, or the Young Königswinter Conference, which is one of the important things organized by the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, mainly in Berlin. John is also the co-chair of the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft in Berlin. Deputy chair. Get my nomenclature correct. So he's done an awful lot. He's got an awful lot of experience. It's all very relevant. And in particular, the time in East Berlin before the wall fell. I think that must have been absolutely amazing. And actually, John and I have a lot in common. I only realized earlier today that we both attended a certain college at a certain university at different times, but we share the same alma mater, which is Queen's College, Oxford. That's just one of the many things that John and I have in common. Anyway, coming back to his role as an author, his first, actually it may not have been his first book, but the first book I read with great interest was the one which he wrote in 2020 called Why the Germans Do It Better. And at that time, Britain was in very poor shape, and Germany was still in quite good shape. Now, in the meantime, things have changed a little bit. Perspectives have changed. But John then went on to write an excellent book about Berlin called In Search of Berlin in 2023. And he is just about to publish his 8th book, only the 3rd one that I'm aware of, but which is called Braver New World, where I think John has gone around the world looking for particular excellence in particular areas in different countries. And I don't know which country is the best in healthcare and which country is the best in robotics, but all will be revealed in his book, which is coming out shortly in English and later this year in German too. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Thank you. And before I go any further, Nick, if ever you get bored, there is a job as an extra PR for me. So you could be my media manager anytime. Meine Damen und Herren, es freut mich sehr, hier zu sein. Es wurde mich gebeten, auf Englisch zu sprechen, aber wenn Sie also ein bisschen später Fragen auf Deutsch stellen möchten, dann bitte machen Sie das. Oder wenn Sie irgendetwas auf Deutsch wiederholen bitten zu wollen, dann machen Sie auch das. As has already been stated, it's not my first time here, and it's a great delight to be here. I love being in Frankfurt. My new second Zuhause, or first Zuhause, is Berlin. And I will come back to the beautiful subject of Brexit in the course of my discussion. But after Brexit, Lucy, my wife, who is sitting in the front row, whose father originally came from Charlottenburg, came from Berlin, and she and I both are very proud Germans as well as Brits now. In fact, she's also American, not so proud. And I'm also, we collect passports, I'm also Slovak, not so proud either. And Lucy and I met actually in Moscow in the early 90s. But when Nick reminds people and others remind people that I was in Ostberlin and Moscow at the fall of the Soviet Union, those of you think, oh my God, this guy, actually, I was, the apartment that we had in Moscow was actually originally Kim Philby's apartment. So that is for another time. Anyway, it is a delight to be here. Lucy has written a fantastic book which has garnered all kinds of shortlists for prizes, including the British Academy, on 1,000 years of the Russian Orthodox Church and its malign influence most of the time on czars of all shapes and sizes, Soviet leaders, and now the evil Putin. And that book has done incredibly well, and I hope she will be back here to talk to you all about things Russia and Ukraine. And I will be back, I hope, if I'm invited, if I behave myself, to talk to you about Braver New World. And I'll mention a few things about that as we go along. I'll talk for half an hour, 40 minutes, and I'm really, really keen, particularly as it's a full house or almost full house, and I'm just looking at you. I scan audiences very well, and I reckon there are some seriously good questions and tough questions coming up. So I want to give myself as much time for you all to, and not just questions, but interventions, thoughts, provocations, whatever you want. Just to talk about, the brief tonight is to talk about the state of the UK, and one of the, I was reading in the Süddeutsche Zeitung on the train on the wonderfully 40-minute delayed Deutsche Bahn this afternoon, which I kind of think is kind of durchschnittlich. I kind of think 40 minutes is sort of, we've all known worse and we've all known better, closer. And by the way, hello to those of you who are online on YouTube and everything. I should look at you as well, and I should speak closer to the microphone. So I was reading a piece in the Süddeutsche Zeitung on the train today about the hideous adoption of English words in the German language, which we can all go through the the great dictionary of English words. My favorite, which usually spawns a parlor game in Berlin, is Die Shit Show. And the question is, which does it relate to? Does it relate to Germany and the current state of German politics? Does it relate to France and the current state of French politics? Or does it relate to the UK? And I think the honest answer is it relates to all three in different ways, in different situations. And we are facing now, and by we, I mean liberal democracy. I mean the window that is between Christian democracy, or in British terms, one nation conservatism on one side, and social democracy or democratic socialism and liberal democracy throughout that on the other. We are facing such a deep, deep crisis that this prompted me to embark on this new book called Brave a New World, looking at best practice, because I had become a professional pessimist. In 2016, I won quite a lot of money on betting on Brexit. I won quite a lot of money betting on Trump 1. I lost some money on betting on Marine Le Pen. She let me down. And I won a lot of money voting on Trump 2. This you will see is probably, I should see a shrink, but a dispensation to see the worst in voting patterns. And it was partly Lucy and others who said to me, look, that's all very well. You can feel quite smug, quite self-satisfied. It doesn't actually get us anywhere. How about looking for the good? How about looking for solutions to this absolute crisis of confidence that we are all feeling in liberal democracy? Whether you are a mainstream decent conservative or whether you are a mainstream decent social democrat and all the points in between, we're all feeling embattled. And in different ways. I mean, the first country that is likely, the first major Western European country, I mean, Italy has already fallen. I was in Hungary last week ahead of the elections there on April the 12th, and that is deeply, deeply worrying, although amazingly Viktor Orban is behind in the polls. Whether it stays like that, because he is supported by Donald Trump, by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and he has all the organs of state in front of him, all the disinformation bots, everything is at his disposal, and he is still apparently 10 points behind, but there are still 6 weeks to go on that. But wherever you look, Slovakia, which I know well, the Czech Republic has gone the wrong way. Slovenia is about to go the wrong way again. And the most important one will be next year in France and what will happen then. Germans are obviously extremely worried about what will happen in Sachsen-Anhalt in September. And the way things are going in Britain, I would bet money now, I haven't checked the odds, on a reform government in the UK next time around. Tonight, being invited here, unless Nick and colleagues are soothsayers, they probably didn't realize how important tonight is for the UK, because it is. In a few hours' time, and our daughter, who is a reporter, she's the northern correspondent for the Times of London, and she will be at the Count in Manchester tonight in the constituency, which could see, and is already seeing, the first battle between two, in British terms, insurgent parties, between Reform, the party of the far right, and don't let anybody here in Germany persuade you that there is something milder about Reform than there is about the AfD. There is not, emphatically not. They are both, in their different ways, as dangerous as each other, as is the RN in France. So you have Reform and the Greens, who are a fascinating sort of reinvented party, much more in the guise of Die Linke than in the guise of the German Greens. And you have those two parties vying to win tonight's referendum, tonight's by-election, and Labour, which used to absolutely dominate the city and dominate this particular Wahlkreis, this particular constituency, could still scrape through, but they are all absolutely, according to the opinion polls, in the same place. And partly through the strangeness of the British electoral system, you could have a winner with 26 or 27% of the vote, which is roughly what those three parties are at. And you have the Conservatives somewhere, in a German sense, they would be below the 5% threshold, which is an extraordinary turn of events. And so sometimes the tendency for journalists and for political journalists is to be driven by the moment and to fail to see perspective. No matter who wins tonight by what might be 10, 15, 20 votes in an incredibly tightly contested race, you have already the breakdown of the old party structures that have existed in the UK throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, namely Conservatives, Liberals, and Labour. That has been shattered now. You have the far-right party Reform that is basically eating the Conservative Party, taking its people, taking its policy and pushing it to the right. And if they do merge, which is possible, or if they do a coalition deal, it is very much aligned to and following the developments in the United States with what happened to the Republican Party, which was a, by and large, mainstream conservative party, which became absorbed and eaten by the far right. The picture on the left in Britain is more confused, and the left has an amazing ability, or the centre left, let's call it that, to eat itself. And you have the Liberals doing okay in certain areas, you have Labour absolutely imploding everywhere, and you have this new invigorated Greens that for many, many young people are the way ahead on a number of things. It's important to remember when you are comparing these three leaders, Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, and Emmanuel Macron, that they share many attributes, but they haven't started from the same place. I mean, obviously all the political systems are different, but Macron managed to shoot himself in the foot by holding elections last year that deprived himself of a parliamentary majority. So now he is having to operate in an almost impossible political environment, choosing prime ministers to get certain things through, but knowing they won't get very much through. And Macron being a lame duck and ahead of the elections next May, who knows who the centrists will present to challenge either Marine Le Pen, if she survives this legal case, or Jordan Bardella. But the situation in France is impossible. The situation in Germany is a fascinating one. And the virtues of the German post-war political settlement are now seen as problems. And I find this a very fascinating turn of events. So you all know the post-war history in which the Grundgesetz was based around, there are some chairs here at the front if anybody, there's a couple of chairs here and there, if anybody needs any chairs. Right here in the front, if you'd like. So the Grundgesetz was designed as a response to the Second World War, to Nazism, to divide power between the Bund and the Länder, to divide power between the legislative, the executive, and the courts, and crucially to divide power between the parties. consensus, coalition, compromise were the three watchwords of the German system. So you always had the Volksparteien working together in all different kinds of permutations, in all the Länder, in the Bund, and it worked. Langsam aber sicher. It took a long time for things to happen, but when they did, they were deliberate, they had been talked through, they had been scenario planned, etc. Now, this very same system is being denounced by so many people as being a problem. So Friedrich Merz has to negotiate with the Social Democrats, and that fact of negotiation is because we now live in a much more dangerous world, a much more highly charged world, and a social media instant response bifurcated world, means that it is incredibly hard for a German chancellor to operate and to introduce the kind of politics and policy reforms that previously would have been seen as virtues. So those are both difficult political arenas to operate in. The problem with Keir Starmer is that he had none of this. When Keir Starmer won power on Liberation Day, July the 4th, 2024, after 14 years of conservative rule, the first 5 or 6 years of which were, in governance terms, perfectly effective, from 2016 and Brexit onwards, were absolute chaos and an object lesson in how to damage a country and how to damage a country's reputation. So this guy picks up an inheritance in which everybody was desperate for change. Everybody looked at this country that had become a joke. When I was in Berlin and I was going to and from London, they would always say, "Oh, have fun in die Partyinsel," and all this sort of stuff in the Boris Johnson era of clown country and all that sort of thing. So Starmer had an inheritance, just like if you're a corporate CEO, if you're a football manager or whatever, if your predecessor has been useless, the only way is up. Except in Starmerland. Sadly, and I say this sadly, this has not happened. His poll ratings are the lowest of any post-war leader. Now, that is partly a reflection of social media and the propensity of people to make instant and quite violent judgments of people that before they would not have made. But in pretty much everywhere, with the exception of various areas of foreign policy, where I think we would all agree he has performed pretty strongly, he received an inheritance of over 150 majority. That was the same size, or almost the same size, as Tony Blair in 1997. There was easy talk about a 10-year, two-parliament tenure, and it is an extraordinary reflection on both the times that we live in, because you may ask yourself how easy it for any liberal democratic leader to command authority nowadays, with social media and disinformation being the state it is in. But in his case, it has been, and I say this with great sadness, as somebody who knows him, somebody who's advised him on several occasions, somebody who has a predisposition to centre-left politics, to see how he has failed. And what is going to happen tonight, even if Labour scrapes through, chances are probably unlikely, but who knows. And then the local elections and Scottish and Welsh elections in May, which are going to be an absolute bloodbath for Labour. The question's already been baked in about the extent to which he will survive or who will take over from him? And will the person who does take over from him be able to revive Labour's fortunes? I think the answer is yes, they will. I think there is still a reservoir of goodwill. Which brings me briefly to my book, Brave a New World. It looks, as Nick was saying in the introduction, and it's out on the 16th of April in the UK, on the 22nd of September in Germany, Brave a New World, Mutig in die Zukunft auf Deutsch. And it looks at 10 countries, each of which are tackling one of the world's problems, Nachhaltigkeit, Gesundheitswesen, all the different areas, education policy, renewable energy, immigration. I focus on different countries doing different things. And there's no panacea. There is no country that you say, oh my God, they are doing so amazing. All we need to do is cut and paste everything they're doing and all our problems will be solved. No, that doesn't exist. But what there is in the countries that I have identified is several things. There is a compact of candor between governments and peoples. There is a maturity of political debate, which is very difficult nowadays for the reasons I have already mentioned, but it is not impossible if you go about things in an incredibly sustained way. There is also a sense of long-term planning. I mean, one area where the UK is an absolute disaster case and has been across all governments for a long time is social care for old people, where nothing has been done. Endless numbers of reports have been produced over the last 10 or 20 years and none of it has been done. I compare and contrast that with what the Japanese, with incredibly difficult demographics of aging, have done in that time, and it is quite remarkable. What the Canadians have done with migration in terms of sponsorship of individual migrants by communities, by church groups and whatever, again, is a very long-term approach towards societal integration, which of course comes up against all kinds of problems and negatives, but it is a sign of political maturity. The single term that, the single notion that I identify as combining all these different countries across the 5 continents and with very different social, cultural, historical inheritances is political courage. And without political courage, in my view, liberal democracy is going to fail. We are going to see, as people from Mark Rutte to Friedrich Merz to Ursula von der Leyen, to many have said, be it in Davos, be it at the Munich Security Conference or in other forums in recent weeks and months, the talk is of the post-war 1945 settlement being over. And I think that's largely correct. I do subscribe to that view, that the world that, I was born at the end of 62, and so my generation and the generation before me, the post-war generation, and everybody up until now has lived through a period that more or less in these sorts of countries has been remarkably resilient. But all things come to an end. And we can either be frightened by change, and it is frightening, or we can embrace it. That is the chance, that is the opportunity that we have now, and that's the thesis of my book, and that's why, in very pragmatic terms, I go through all the areas of improving politics and policy. It's also about believing in what you stand for and knowing that what you stand for will not be popular among other people, among lots of other people. And this is something, you've got to give him credit, that Donald Trump and people like him do very, very well. They are not scared of having adversaries, of having critics, of having enemies. They embrace the fact that people disagree with them. And in some ways, I'm not an advocate of divisive politics per se, but I am an advocate of politics where you say, this is what we've been voted in to do. This is what we're going to do. It might involve raising taxes. Sorry if we promised we would do the opposite, but the circumstances are different. We've got to do this, 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 and this. It's going to be difficult for this amount of period. We stand by this. We believe that whatever it is, older people have got too much money, or the southeast of England have got too much money. I mean, the regional politics in the UK, is very, very problematic. But we're going to do this, 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 and this, and this, and we've been voted in to do it, and sorry if you don't like it, but that's the way we're going to be. And that is the opportunity Keir Starmer had. He absolutely had that. There was nothing stopping him from behaving in that manner. And what he chose instead was the politics of incrementalism, of U-turns, and of doing what Tony Blair did. But then Tony Blair, who I also knew very well, we had a big falling out over Iraq, but before and after I knew him. And the one thing he said, and he said publicly, was, I really regret my caution. I really regret that in my first 5 years in domestic politics, I could have done anything. I could have gone into the euro, I could have done all kinds of domestic political changes, but basically I looked over my shoulder the whole time, whether it's at Rupert Murdoch or whether it's at this or at that, and he flew halfway around the world to an Australian island to visit Rupert Murdoch the year before he was elected, in order almost to say, don't worry, I'm not going to do very much, you don't need to worry, I'm just going to hold the ship, and there's nothing for you to be scared about.
Murdoch being the owner of the...
It was The Sun and The Times at the time. And that was before social media, right? That was in the old days of mainstream media. So I come back to, in this book and in my journalism and my writings about Germany and my writings about the UK, ultimately it will come down to political courage. It will come down to political courage, whether it comes to the way we deal with Donald Trump, the way we deal in Germany with rearmament, and actually, even though I don't subscribe, to the CDU's politics, I think I'm sometimes in Berlin, maybe it's Berlin, the only person in the room who thinks Friedrich Merz is doing a good job. To say that in Berlin is not a good look, but I do it he has said some pretty stupid things, but by and large, his sense of within this very much harder environment of coalition building, when it has come to the language he has used about Trump, whether it is about Germany's rearmament, again, you can agree or you can disagree, but Germany is going to hit 3.5 by 2029. I mean, that is remarkable for a country that was below 2% just before the pandemic. Britain is scheduled, if the successor government times 2 to Starmer gets that far, is scheduled to hit 3.5 by 2035. There is a huge, Germany's military spending is about to be double that of Britain and France. In other words, Britain and France together equals Germany's. And that is in a very short amount of time. Now, Olaf Scholz, who I'm not a great fan of, but he certainly did certain things, got that going. And this idea that you can't change German society, and that German society is more conservative with a small c and unwilling to change, is an argument I don't see. And I think what has happened to this country and the whole post-war foundations of its foreign policy, whether it's the cliche of exports to China, energy with Russia, and security from the United States, that has all been blown up. And it's good that it has been blown up, but it is also remarkable, in my view, and I know I keep on praising Germany much more than Germans do, but I think what Germany has achieved in the last couple of years in terms of realigning itself, in terms of the way it thinks about itself, has been remarkable. So I'm probably going over time, and you want to hear more about Britain. Let me just say a few words about Jeffrey Epstein and the royal family, and the economy, and the press. Right. Okay, so Epstein. Peter Mandelson, I knew well. Just see that the European Commission is also starting a legal case against him.
So you knew him well?
Well, I knew all the Labour people well. Yeah, and I bear the scars of knowing them all. There was this gilded era that they thought that they were all. I remember once being in a queue at an annual event of a PR company very close to New Labour, and these two people in their 30s were saying, "Are you going to Davos this year?" "Oh, yes, I am. But this year, I'm absolutely going to get a day's skiing in just before." And to me, this was in a political meeting of the Labour Party, and it just made me think and realise just how the certain bearings of a certain political institution had gone off the rails. Royal family, a subject about which Germans obsess far more, in my opinion, than Brits. And whenever anything happens about the royal family, German TV or Austria or whatever say, "Oh, please, can you do something?" I'm like, no, please, I don't want to do anything about the British royals. I mean, suffice to say, because you will read do you read Bild Zeitung? Maybe not. I'm sure you read more august organs, but all German media have been obsessed with the Prince Andrew, or whatever he's now called, Mountbatten-Windsor story in recent times, and it's not a funny one. It is a deeply, deeply shocking, appalling one, but the hideous violence and exploitation of hundreds, who knows how many women and girls in this Epstein-moneyed cabal that goes from the Norwegian royal family to the British royal family to left-wing philosophers, to Donald Trump trying to hide it, to the Clintons testifying. I mean, who knows? It's everywhere and everywhere. And Peter Mandelson, all deeply, deeply corroded. But in terms of the British royal family, it is potentially existential. You have a king with developed cancer, who has all the hallmarks, if you know your British history, of being Edward VII, of the person who waited such a long time to take the throne, and he took the throne at a relatively old age, and at the end of a cycle, and it felt like that. The only two popular royals, William and Catherine, and she has cancer, and that's a deeply, he seems, just when you look at him, to be not in the best of shapes about William, about the state of the world. And then you have all the stuff about Harry and Meghan, and it feels to me like an institution that either is going to just go, or is going to become a sort of Dutch cycling monarchy, which I think would be a very good thing, and it's already moved in that direction. It's slimmed down. But there is so much about it. The finances are opaque, the deference to the royal family, the failure, as we've seen with Andrew, to abide by any rules, which is fine. You can always have a maverick, a bad apple in any set. The issue is that there was nobody, not a single person, starting with his mother, downwards, the Queen, who had any interest or ability to control him. Not a single person in government, in the royal court, in the family, in anything. So that is a sign, when you have no checks and balances, of an institution that is in deep trouble. So you have this country, Britain, this island, like Germany, with its Weltanschauung after the Second World War now being shattered. In a different way, Britain's is being shattered too. This special relationship with the United States, this land of the free, what's happened to that? It's gone. This country now run by a far-right fanatic who's, all you need to do is read the last chapter of the National Security Strategy, available online at any time you want to see it, to see the extent to which it is open American policy to undermine and destroy liberal democracy in Western Europe and replace it with far-right authoritarian nationalism. It is all there in black and white. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is absolutely set out policy. Marco Rubio's speech, polite though it was, very well written though it was in Munich, was exactly that. That was exactly the American intention. So for Britain, that matters an enormous amount because we have put so many shares in our relationship with the United States, and given that we chose to disengage from Europe, that is all the more important. Then you have the institutions, the BBC, that is being defunded all the time, and you compare that with the amount of money the Chinese and the Russians are pouring into the global south and the extent to which the BBC is disappearing from those. BBC now has 2 foreign correspondents in the whole of Africa. That's it. It's gone, right? And you compare that with CCTV China, RT Russia, who have, I can't remember the exact number, I think China had 30 in one country at one point. I mean, it is extraordinary how Britain's soft power has been, not deliberately, but has been undermined through negligence. So that, unfortunately, is in my view, the economy, well, even after Germany has borrowed $500 billion for critical infrastructure and even more for defense, its borrowing as a proportion of per capita GDP will be lower than Britain's, even after Germany has spent all this money. Britain is leveraged to the hilt. It can't do pretty much anything without the bond markets freaking out, which is partly a legacy of the much missed British lettuce, otherwise known as Liz Truss. That's an in-joke for those of you who don't read the Daily Star, a very good newspaper. So the British economy, and again, that's a very difficult situation for Starmer, but his budgets until now have not been designed to engender confidence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to end on pessimism. I want to actually say that both countries are in deep, deep trouble. France is in deep, deep trouble. Not to mention the United States, which is beyond deep trouble. It is now in, I think, an existential crisis. I would, misery person that I am, put some money on the fact that the next presidential elections will be closer to Putin-style elections than American-style elections. We could have seen the last proper democratic elections in the United States for a number of reasons, which we could go into if you're interested. If you're not, you're not. So America is in one category. The fight is still on in our countries between decency and authoritarianism. But for decency to win, decency has to totally change the way it does its politics. And so tonight, with the Labour government staring into an abyss, there is no better time. Possibly Keir Starmer could still do it. That's for the Labour MPs and membership to work out, or his successor, to look in the mirror and say, we can't go on like this. The politics of incrementalism cannot continue. That is not a politics of irresponsibility, of having some terrible fight with the markets or doing crazy things. It's a politics of long-termism and of political courage and of staring at the people that criticize you and saying, sorry, I disagree, I'm going to continue doing this. You have one option at the next election to kick me out if you wish to, but until that time, zip up, and I'm going to get on with that job. There is still that prospect, and so with all these institutions in Britain in such a deeply troubled situation, let's hope that we're going to find this radical brilliant new leader to take us out of this difficult situation that we all find ourselves now.
No applause yet, because you haven't said anything about the press, apart from some oblique references to the Daily Star. Yeah, I want you to, I mean, for the benefit of this audience, which is, foreign,
I mean, the Frankfurter PresseClub know more about the British press than okay, the British press, the BBC is about to have a new Director General, who I think tried to do some good things, but there was a whole series of scandals, many of which he knew nothing about, some sex scandal and mishandling of programs and all kinds of things, not least on Sunday night in the BAFTA Film Awards. As the latest, it never stops at the BBC, the sort of really poor middle management, but at the same time, BBC being attacked all the time by right-wing newspapers, The Telegraph, The Mail, The Times, and bloggers elsewhere. So the BBC was the absolute centerpiece. The other commercial broadcasters are doing their thing. There's a lot of interesting new independent journalism online and elsewhere that is doing some good work. The newspapers are, as they've always been, they're in various camps, and the newspapers reflect the political parties, so that whereas you would say before that the Telegraph and the Mail were conservative and sort of staunchly conservative, Thatcherite, whatever newspapers, which is fine, that's a political church, that's absolutely fine. They are now properly Trumpian, in my opinion. That started with the advocacy of Brexit, and it has only accelerated since then. The Times is sort of slightly moving in that direction, but is still holding the ground, the sort of FAZ ground. The tabloids continue to do their thing. I mean, all the newspaper numbers have gone down. Printed, but I mean, online and subscriptions. But, as with here, they're all finding their own business models now through online subscriptions and paywall. The Guardian doesn't have much of a paywall. It sort of has a sort of proxy paywall. Its numbers have gone down. It's still continuing to do its thing in Europe and in the UK and in America. You look at the American press and what's happened to the Washington Post. It's an absolute disaster. And you look at what's happened to the networks and the way they have kowtowed to Trump. The new thing in Britain is GB News, which is this Trumpian TV station, which France has its own equivalent, Fox News in America, but C News in France is very similar as well. And yesterday's extreme, yesterday's abnormal becomes today's normal, and that's that. But there are a lot of interesting new media and new media outlets in the UK and here and elsewhere that are challenging the status quo. The issue for journalism generally is, as it is with other organs of checks and balances on power, whether it's the judicial system or whatever else, is to have the strength to stand up to bullying executive power. And I'm absolutely convinced that if, as I think is possible, going on to probable, reform wins in the UK, it will absolutely do a totally Trumpian playbook. And you have seen how in America, people thought, no, that couldn't happen, that couldn't happen, that couldn't happen. Everything has happened that people thought couldn't happen before. That would be absolutely the case in the UK. So that reinforces my point about we are right in the midst of a battle now.
One battle after another, maybe.
After another, right.
Now we can applaud.
And now I want you all to disagree with me. So who would like to start with some points?
Yes. Oh.
I'm going to cheat. I've got 3 questions.
Oh my God, right.
How have you bet on the by-election tonight is the first question. Do you see the present constellation favouring Scottish independence? And if you were revising why the Germans do it better now, what would you change, if anything?
Right, oh my God, right, 3 questions. How long have you got? Right, okay, I will try and answer them in very short sentences.
Interrupting you rudely, what was the title of that book, which was quite, the sort of counter case?
Oh, Caput.
Yeah,
Caput. Yeah, right. Okay, so on your 3 questions in order tonight, as I said, I genuinely don't know. We'll know in a few hours' time. The opinion polls say they are all 3 parties.
Did you bet?
No, I didn't bet. No, I didn't bet. No, I didn't bet. Sorry, I did not bet. The second question was...
Is the present political constellation in Britain driving Scotland closer to independence?
That's a really good question. We all thought that Scottish independence, when Nicola Sturgeon, the first minister in Scotland, got into all kinds of trouble and was forced to resign, and her husband facing charges and stuff, we thought Scottish independence was dead. It seems to be back potentially on the agenda. And the more, I mean, there are lots of Reform voters in Scotland. It's not as if it's a Reform-free. Wales, Reform may well end up as the largest party. But the more England moves to the right, the better it is for the Scottish nationalists, because it puts Labour in an impossible position, and it gives Scottish nationalists a reason to want independence if they see in England that they regard as problematical. And we'll see what happens in the elections in May. But yes, it's definitely back on the agenda again. Oh, so why the Germans? Absolutely. So whenever I get asked this, and I get asked this about 3 times a week, oh no, it's fine. It's like, and I remember when I did a 20-minute live interview on Deutschlandfunk, and the interviewer Christoph Heinemann kept on saying, "Ja, aber wie könnten Sie so etwas schreiben?" You know, this idea of how could you write this nonsense that. And I must say I had quite a few wobbles in the Scholz government, and I mean it was a book as much about fury about Britain as it was about Germany. That fury I felt deeply, absolute fury. I don't feel that fury now. I feel because I mean, I had such hopes invested in Starmer, and I still think if this government, with him or without him, can sort itself out, it is nothing like Johnson and Truss. Rishi Sunak, to give him his credit, he was just at the wrong end of a cycle, but he wasn't a bad man. He made some mistakes, but he wasn't a bad man. But what happened before so brutalized, humiliated that country, my country, your country, I still assume, that it's very hard to extricate yourself from that. And Germany was the juxtaposition to that, which doesn't mean at all that there's a lot about the Merkel legacy that I disagree with, and I'm very worried about Germany and the AfD and everything else like that. But I still think, particularly if you look at a lot of the media, there is a sense of seriousness and deliberation about this country, which is being challenged. I mean, some media now is becoming quite sensational and sensationalist, a lot of the media discourse, a lot of the discourse in the Bundestag is becoming a lot more brutal than it used to be, which I think is bad. But in spite of all of that, I still think there is this reservoir of seriousness. And it's born in Germany knowing the consequences of a bad history. And what Britain and France do is blithely somehow think this couldn't possibly happen to us. And it's this complacency that I found was my biggest concern.
Thank you. You haven't talked much about Brexit yet, even though it's probably an elephant in the room.
Because it was so wonderful.
To what extent does it really feature in British politics, in the sense that maybe more and more people realize it was a disaster, or maybe not? And in the same context, there has been a realignment of the British government to the European Union just recently under Starmer,
to what extent might this give some hope that it could have a positive impact?
So the Starmer record on Europe depends on whether you see the glass as half full or half empty. And some days I see it as one, and some days I see it as another. My hope is, this is again the looking over his shoulder. Oh my God, oh my God. If you look at the Umfragen, if you look at the opinion polls, approximately 65 to 70% of Brits think it was a mistake. Does that mean they would necessarily want to go back in? And we also forget the question, do they actually want us back in? Is another, it's a serious, it's a serious question. The negotiations for a re-entry as a third country into the European Union, leapfrogging over the other candidate countries that are applying to go in, and without any of the advantages that Margaret Thatcher had negotiated or banged her fist to get, the rebate and all the other things, none of those would be on the table, and you'd be starting from scratch. So I can sort of sympathize with a government that says, do we have the energy with everything else going on in the world? Does the European Commission, having to deal with Trump and Putin and all the ramifications of Ukraine, having to deal with Orban and Fico, have they got the energy to do that? I think that is for another time. But could Starmer do a lot more than he has been doing in terms of single market realignment, in terms of customs union realignment? A lot of people right at the heart of his team are pushing him to go a lot further. And if out of this morass of gloom that the Labour Party feels itself in, and that's not journalism, that's genuinely what they are feeling themselves in, there is a sense of, come on, we've got to show more courage, let's really go for it in terms of the European agenda, not in terms of re-membership, but in terms of much stronger, much more open reintegration, they would absolutely succeed, and I'm absolutely convinced that it'd be very hard for the Reform people to win votes. They would reinforce their own votes, but they wouldn't win any more votes, because whether it's the 90-minute queue that you have to endure at German airports, whether it's, depending on how you describe it, the 4% cut in GDP and growth that Britain has suffered from, whether it's the fact that so many businesses have gone pleite because of not being able to work in the European Union, there would be an absolute groundswell, in my opinion, of enthusiasm, but it needs to be driven. You need to win the argument, and you need to show confidence rather than looking over your shoulder.
So do you think that Starmer still sees it as a toxic issue? It's a possible vote loser for amongst Labour voters?
It depends on how courageous you are. It's a vote loser, and it's a massive vote winner. A lot of young people are not voting Labour because they don't think Labour on Europe and a lot of other issues is pushing the agenda on anything. And that's, so you will, of course, you'll lose votes. But as Trump would say, to hell with them, we're going to win a lot of other votes elsewhere if we know. Yeah, we'll go with, well, we're going to get new people.
John, hi. Thanks for what you said so far. It's been really great. As a Brit, albeit with an Irish passport, a Geordie accent, and a Slovak wife.
Slovak wife?
Yes.
Wow. Is she here?
No. Oh. I wish she'd come though.
She's got better things to do.
She would have loved it. I was going to ask you about, you admittedly what you're saying is describing a very pessimistic situation, and I'm kind of wondering about, there's a glass in front of you which is more than half full. If you were looking at a positive possibility for the UK, what could we do in terms of allying ourselves with a rebuilding project in Europe, not just the financial one? And also for the media, you were also very down on the media, and I understand that. Is there a place for the mainstream British media to play a role in that?
Is there a place for what, sorry?
The mainstream British media to play a role in that rebuild.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a huge amount of virtues in Britain. I mean, the innovation culture, the startup culture, I mean, I'm sure some of you are involved in this. Startup to scale up is always a problem, but that's a technical issue that could easily be sorted with more incentives for tax incentives and other incentives for VCs and others, and not to sell. You know, London and other main cities, you know, are one level, they're absolutely booming. They look great. There's attracting people from. There is an irreverence. There is a creativity, an entrepreneurialism about Britain at its best. And I'm not doing that in a sort of flag-waving sense. I'm just saying that straight up. You know, one of the great problems in Germany is this, Risikoscheu. This is a sort of sense of not taking risks, not getting bank credits. I mean, a lot of that's changing. A lot of that is changing, and some of the startups, particularly in the defence realm, are quite remarkable. But Britain got there 10 or 20 years earlier, and there is a huge amount of potential there. What I always think is the problem with Britain is that, in one respect, on that side of economic activity, it's incredibly modern, and yet it always feels hidebound by some of its traditions and some of its stuck in its ways. Another area I haven't spoken about is the decision, which was a Labour government's decision in mid-Blair, I can't remember when it was, 2005, 2006, by Estelle Morris, the then education minister, to abolish the necessity of learning a foreign language, which is an absolute disgrace, and it has been an absolute decimated sort of that sense that Brits and Americans think, because they occupy the English language, that you just basically shout loudly and you'll get what you want, has held Britain back in so many ways. And, you know, if I could see, even if outside the formal surroundings of the European Union, but the European Union is going to evolve, it's going to have variable geometry, which is what actually John Major was advocating back in the day, of core countries and then next loop countries and then next loop countries. And Britain could end up being a next loop country with some associate status. Somewhere, don't forget, we weren't in Schengen, we weren't in the Euro anyway. We were already a bit of an associate. So I could see some sort of not quite in, before we were not quite out, now we're not, just a not quite in type of situation. But it does need, and in a way, if you look back to early Blair and Cool Britannia and, all that sort of stuff, Britain was a very sexy European and global country, right? It really, really was. And it could be that again, not in competition to other countries, but with other countries as well. So that would be my optimistic dream, that France, Britain, Germany, Poland, other countries, smaller countries, you could actually, this idea that Europe has whipped itself into this state, reinforced by Trumpians and others, that it's this legacy continent, and America is driving ahead, and China is driving ahead, and others driving ahead. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and there's a hell of a lot of good practice going on in Europe and in Britain that could be a driver for that. And I mean, being deputy of the German Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, I think there's so much interesting and good bilateral work going on. Some of it's at governmental level, and the embassies, and the British Embassy in Berlin, I think, does a really good job. But a lot of it happens just sort of in a non-political way in the cultural sector, and the two countries are very, very closely aligned.
Just add at the end of that, what do you think the role of the mainstream media?
Oh, sorry, mainstream media. I mean, I don't think it's any different to what it used to be. It's there, and it does a very good job. It's really good at investigating, and it's really good at being fearless when it wants to be fearless. What it the power is all in a certain direction. It's much more on the right than on the left, but it's never as powerful. Even at its height, it was never as powerful as politicians thought it was. They were just scared. And being a journalist, the best thing you could ever do to a journalist is just say F you. And, you know, journalists have quite a sort of, you know, I was really surprised. I worked for 3 or 4 years in Westminster, in the lobby, the extent to which politicians were sort of almost trying to ingratiate themselves with journalists. And of course you want to have good contacts on both sides, but, you know, just get on with your work.
Yes, I would like to come...
This will be a difficult question.
Good.
No, I would,
Well, they've all been difficult. They've all been good.
no, I would like to come back to your prescription to save democracy. In other words, you prescribe another authoritarian leader, a strong leader, but liberal in mind. Maybe that will help, but where can you find these leaders? If you look in Netherlands, suddenly there is a young guy coming up. Obviously, he has the right prescription. If you look at Hungary, also there is somebody challenging the authoritarian leaders, and that could happen in the US as well. You look very careful at these people. Who are the people in Britain you would bet on?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say internationally, I wrote a blog about it, and I think a piece, I think it was in either Politico or Foreign Policy a couple of weeks ago about it. I think in Western liberal democratic terms, the leader who I think is showing the most amount of cojones is Mark Carney. I think he has been a remarkable, you know, Mr. Very straight-laced, head of the Bank of England, central banker, very good central banker, but very, very circumspect, measured, establishment figure. And I say that all in a good sense. The way he has stared Donald Trump in the eyes and faced him down, and the fact that the Canadians let it appear in the media that they had done wargaming on an American invasion of Canada, and that Canada would last 3 days. And they put that out into the public domain deliberately to say, guys, this isn't a joke, this is serious. What he's doing, what he's threatening to do with Greenland is just the start. And the 51st state stuff, you know, becomes like a sort of, starts with a sort of late night tippy-tappy on Truth Social and then becomes policy. You know, Carney is deadly serious, and that is, in my view, getting close to what I'm suggesting, which is absolute candor with your people. You know, guys, we have got an enemy. Not just an adversary, not just a difficult customer, not just an unreliable partner, but a potential enemy, and 90% of Canadians live within, I think it's 50 miles of the border. All that land to the north is, you know, uninhabited. And so it's an absolute existential threat. And this guy is clear. He's not saying to people, oh, don't worry, you know, in old sort of Merkel way. Oh, don't worry, everything's fine. You know, just have your Kaffee und Kuchen and everything will be lovely. He is saying, we face, you know, what are we going to do about this, guys? We're all in this together. So that's what I think. Who might it be? Well, I mean, you may or may not have seen all the different candidates for the Labour leadership. You don't... Labour, I mean, if that's your question about Britain, well, I mean, in Britain, there's only 2 routes to a change of leadership, if a change of leadership begins. And Starmer is he's very cautious in terms of his politics, but he's very resolute, it seems, in staying in power. So don't discount him staying. Don't discount him learning the lessons. That's also possible. And becoming a very different type of leader. Some people can transform the way they lead. He could be that person, I'm not sure, but he could be that person. Or there's a general election, in which case we have this nightmare scenario possibly beckoning, or Labour still have until 2029 time with a new leader, in which case you may or may not have seen the various candidates being discussed. It's very difficult with leaders, because until they're leaders, you really don't know how they're going to lead.
Mention a couple of
Sure.
candidates?
So there's Angela Rayner, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, who got into trouble over real estate, falsely claiming on tax on a second property. She then had to resign. She is the sort of darling of the left. She could be that person. Andy Burnham, the mayor of the Manchester region, the sort of, I suppose, the sort of closest to Minister-President of Nordrhein-Westfalen or something, a big player. He would have been the Labour candidate at the by-election tonight, but he was vetoed from doing that specifically by Keir Starmer and Labour's ruling body, the National Executive Committee. So the recriminations are going to be incredible if Labour lose, on the assumption that Labour would not have lost if he is a much more popular person. But if he had won and become a Member of Parliament, within a month he would have challenged Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer, to survive, has to not do that. There's this health minister who some people think is good, I'm not so convinced, called Wes Streeting, who's very sort of Blairite in his approach. His position is not helped by, he was very close to Peter Mandelson, whose political stock is not very high anymore. There's a defense minister called Al Kahns, who people haven't really heard of. I saw him at an event in Berlin in the autumn, and he was pretty impressive. Then there are the two candidates of stability. One is the foreign minister, Yvette Cooper. She's much older than the others. She would be a sort of stability candidate, and the defense minister, who's very similar to Boris Pistorius, John Healey, would also be that. So it's an open race between all of them.
So we have time for maybe two more questions then. There's one there and one in front.
You've just
Okay, three in that case. Three questions.
more or less answered the question I was going to ask about who, as you mentioned, about if Starmer doesn't make it, doesn't survive, who eventually would be fit to take over. And I think it's a very difficult question because they're going to have to be extremely strong and they're going to have to stand up for their own principles as well as those of the country. So I think you've probably answered that. Who of the ones you've just mentioned would win the race is debatable. And I think as well they've got a lot of, there's a lot of feeling in the country, or at least in the north, that Andrew Burnham would be the person who should probably take over. The question is, I mean, I come from Manchester originally. Running a city like Manchester is one thing, running a country is another. And I'm not quite sure how Andy Burnham would work out internationally, even though he may be better for Britain itself. But we'll do that because you more or less answered it. My other question is just briefly, I think probably many people know Boris Johnson got off being prosecuted basically because he had excellent lawyers who cost a lot of money. Mandelson has employed the same lawyers, and I'm sure Andrew
Mishcon de Rea.
To also pay for excellent lawyers. Do you think we'll ever see either of them prosecuted and face penalties for what they've done?
So just very quickly on your first point, just to finish off the leadership thing, it's a really good question. Shut your eyes and can you imagine them in the room with Donald Trump or with Putin or with Merz or with or whatever? And it's hard. I mean, don't forget Zelensky. Was a TV comedian, right? Nobody, and even before the war, he didn't cut a particularly impressive figure. People can grow into jobs, and.
But would they have the time between now and an election and the next general election? Is the question.
I mean, the British system is, as you know, it's brutal. You just go one day, you're in. There's no transition. You go straight in. So there's an element of sink or swim. I think Burnham could do it quite easily. He has run something quite big by European standards, the size of quite a few sort of small to medium European countries in population. Yeah, I think if Labour lose tonight, one of the first things is that somebody in the Northwest region will resign their seat and will challenge Starmer to say, are you really going to veto him again? And I think that could happen. I mean, Angela Rayner, I think, would be great. I'm just on the sort of shut your eyes, Trump, Putin territory. Would she quite do that? Maybe. I mean, people wouldn't have expected Giorgia Meloni to be, as in her own terms, as spectacularly successful as she has been. She really has been spectacular. You know, she not only has all the Trumpians and all of that team loving her, she also has Merz and von der Leyen and everybody absolutely clinging to her latest word. So you can grow into the job. The other question was?
About whether we'll ever see...
Oh, whether see them. It's a really good question. I mean, Mishcon de Reya, I mean, there are a lot of British legal companies who are Rottweiler-ish, having had to face various libel things in my time, a One Official Secrets Act thing in my time. I've seen what British, lawyers are like, but also what defence lawyers could be like as well. They were on my side, yes. I won all of them. In fact, they were all.
For the loopholes.
Yeah. No, I mean the legal mechanism under which they are both being investigated, was it abuse in public life, is very, very difficult. Misconduct in public office, and the government, well before any of this happened, was looking to reform it because it was very hard to prosecute technically. I mean, I think. It's hard because I don't know, to misquote Donald Rumsfeld, I don't know what the known unknowns are. I work from the assumption that the Andrew thing will be easier because there's just so much on him as the. I think both probably will end up in Knast. Yeah, okay. Probably. But what do I know? Right.
Running out of time. We have 2 more.
Is there any questions at the back? Because anybody at the back?
Yes, just a quick question.
Questions at the back. There were 2 or 3 at the back because I'm just worried that people are not being.
Yeah, I was just going to.
A couple of people at the back as well. Yeah. Sorry, I mean, go ahead if you want to. No, go ahead.
I was just going to press you quickly on your criticism of Starmer. Did Labour stand on the wrong manifesto? You're saying that they lack political courage. Should they have released themselves from the fiscal straitjacket before the election? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, possibly. But they were so desperate to get in, just no hostages to fortune, just get in. But I also think that you can be square with the audience, with the public and with voters, and say, look, we did this. They would have got a lot of opprobrium for it, but they could have simply said right at the beginning, sorry guys, we're going to change, we're going to go back on our word, and we're going to raise taxes. They would have been absolutely hammered in the short term, absolutely hammered. Their poll ratings would have, they'd have been absolutely monstered in the press. But short term is not the same as medium and long term. And what matters when you get to a general election is the state of the economy and the state of your fiscal and economic credibility. So I think they could have got away with it if they had done that. Would they, with hindsight, have been better off not doing it before the election? Sure. But I also sympathise with the idea that they just wanted to win. But they could have done it. What they did was this, to hold that early morning press conference, as Rachel Reeves said, which is basically, I'm going to raise taxes, and then she doesn't. I mean,
Wacko.
Right.
Before this lady asks her question, I'd like to engage the online audience.
And are we going to get some questions at the back as well?
We're running out of time, John.
But
we're running out of time. Maybe
but
one
quick.
last one. But from
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah. From the online audience, we have a question from Ajay Daskol.
Take mine.
No, it is on. It's supposed to be on. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So, from Ajay Daskol, what are the solutions going forward for more economic cooperation between the UK and Western Europe, mainly DACH, which can lift the European economy, which is currently in the doldrums? Quick word for that.
Sorry, what was it? Was forward for more economic cooperation and the Europe.
Sorry, the UK to help. Dach.
Yeah, is this working? Yeah, it is working. Ultimately, it will come down to economic alignment with the European Union, and there's a lot of bilateral work that can be and is going on at the moment, but the extent to which it is difficult to do that at the moment should not be underestimated, and I'll keep my remarks as short as that.
The lady in front.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much for your explanations. I would like to hear some of them again. When I was 16, we visited Britain, and this was really a dream. I went to Britain later on, and I met a girlfriend on the ship and so on. So we went to the disco every evening, I must say. And what I didn't understand, it was when she wanted to come back to Britain, she was not allowed to come in because, she had no job. She wanted to find a job in Britain. But last night I heard heard some views on the radio, and people. There are too many migrants, it was said. Yeah. And what can you explain why now Britain is so much flooded, in inverted commas, by migrants? Of course, they have good things to do there and so on.
The immigration.
What is the explanation for this? Right. I can't understand.
Okay. The immigration debate has two aspects in all of these countries: in the United States, in Britain, in France, in Germany. Well, there's three aspects. There is the media debate, there is the economic debate, and there is the political debate, and they're not always the same thing. The media will tell you in all three countries, or most of the media, that it is continuing in these torrents of unstoppable stuff. The numbers are the exact opposite. I don't know how many of you have traveled east out of Germany. When you live in Berlin, that's much easier, going to Prague, going to Warsaw, Poznan, place like that. Every time on a train, it's like Schengen never happened. German, Grenzpolizei, every train I've been on. And what they do, by the way, is racial profiling all the time. You see that. Just coming off a plane at BER Airport last week, there is no passport control, but there were 4 or 5 of them just standing in the entrance, and the only people they stopped were not white people. And now you could say, well, they've done their numbers, etc., but I'm just saying that as an anecdotal statement. But numbers have gone down drastically in Germany. They have gone down drastically in Britain. They've gone down drastically in France. You would not read that. You would not, if you see much of the media, social media, you would not get that impression. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done on integration. There is a huge amount of work that needs to be done. Again, I would look at the Canada experience. It makes lots of mistakes, but it's a very, very much more mature political debate, which also comes down to, which is a topic for another time, and maybe a future book of mine, demographics, aging populations, shrinking youth populations. It's not as simple as that in terms of artificial intelligence and gaps in the employment market, but we need migrants. What we need to have are systems that work. And by the way, Britain, in its ridiculousness, not having ID cards, which is something that Keir Starmer was thinking about, which is something I write about in my new book from Estonia, and it works on every level, and he just sold it wrongly, and it's basically died as an issue. So in Britain, when you get into Britain, you can just lose yourself within 10 seconds, which doesn't happen in other countries.
On demographics, we have a question from a young man at the back.
Firstly, thank you very much. This has been immensely informative. I had 2 very quick questions. Firstly, can I just challenge this notion of left versus right?
Yep.
Do you think it's left versus right, or just competence versus incompetence? And the reason why people actually really cross with the so-called mainstream parties is because they've just done a sort of terribly bad job at being in government. That's question 1. And then secondly, in your book about parts of the world which are doing things really well, so I've just finished from Oxford as well, and I've just returned from an internship in China. and I have been immensely impressed by how things work over there. And I was just wondering if in your book you talk about anything they do which is good, which the West could learn from potentially. Thank you.
So on your second, both very good. On your second point, I don't do China. I don't do any sort of big countries that spawn all kinds of questions around political systems. I have two countries that are sort of soft authoritarian or absolutely sort of non-democracies that think of themselves as democracies. One is India, now under Modi, which has done a remarkable job on digitization. I mean, you know, the jokes that Indians like to make about Germany and the failure to digitize, it was really funny. They were telling me all these anecdotes about how, you know, they don't carry any rupees in their wallets, but they carry all these euros just in case, you know, they happen to be going to Germany. But you know, Modi is not a Democrat of the purest sense, and what he did in terms of shaking down, I mean, I'm just being very simplistic. It's a much more complicated, but basically, digitizing India and digitizing rural India is just remarkable. Can you do that in a country with more checks and balances? The answer is yine. I mean, the answer is yes, you can. It's harder because there are those checks and balances, but you just need political determination. Which brings me to your first point. You're absolutely right, but I wouldn't say for the reasons that you cite. This whole left and right thing is now a bit of a misnomer, because I mean, a lot of authoritarian right politicians are into huge amounts of state spending. You know, particularly for their interest groups. I mean, I was just using the sort of centre-right to centre-left mainstream politics terms in the old school, but I think it's really interesting that are these terms redundant now? I mean, to me, and you're absolutely right, and the whole premise of my book is that liberal democracy will fail, and arguably will deserve to fail, if it fails to show the courage to meet the challenges of not just now, but the future as well. You know, we are currently being the authors of our own misfortune. It isn't happening without us seeing it. We can see what is happening. And when you see other countries doing things in a more cavalier way, that's not the way I would advocate at all, but there is something about political courage that is absolutely failing us, and whether it's partly incompetence, but I think it is incompetence based in a failure of courage.
A nice note on which to end, maybe. Sorry, is this on? Is this on? Is this on? It is on. It is on. I've got 2 or 3 housekeeping points, but I think you want to give John a little award. Yeah. Okay.
Heute Abend. Okay. This is thank you from Frankfurt Press Club. Sorry, my voice. We enjoyed very much to host you all here. It was very interesting for us. We like you to come back. My colleague Semi from the service still has some pretzels and some wine. We can stay here in the room until 9 o'clock. And I want to thank you all for visiting our club today. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nick. And I hope to see you again next year.
We'll be back, Petra. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just do one tiny piece of Werbung? Young Königswinter. Young Königswinter. Germans and Brits, aged 26 to 30, meet once a year. 45 split between the two countries. We're looking for last year's was amazing. Huge amounts of Vielfalt in terms of geography, in terms of background, in terms of career paths and interests and the type of people you are. It's not the old sort of fuddy-duddy approach that used to exist. It's very, very different. So if any of you, 26 to 30, there's no flexibility on the ages, sadly, you just missed it.
Did you, 126.
126. So either if you're interested, if it applies to you, and if not, then please pass it to your friends. Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft website, all the details are there. It's an amazing thing, and we all want German-British relations to get better and better and people to get more and more connected.
Thank you for that, John. That was excellent. Before we give John another final round of applause, yes, absolutely, absolutely. My housekeeping points. First of all, the next Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft Rhein-Main event is on the 19th of March, when Dr. Phil Winters, who is a bit of a psychologist but also an AI expert, is going to be talking to us about how people make decisions. Completely different topic from this evening. It could be very interesting. Then there's someone at the back who I think might listen to this. Am I right? Austrian? Yes, I am, absolutely. I haven't arranged it yet, but I'm hoping to invite Sir Nick Harvey back, who is the CEO of the European Movement UK, who was here last year and gave a very interesting talk. And I think it would be good if we could get him back to give us an update on where the UK stands in his perspective. And what was the next one? I thought there were 3, but probably there are only 2. So thank you for this excellent audience. Thank you for the questions in the public audience. Thank you also for the YouTube participation. And I wish you all a nice evening. Thank you.